Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragnishantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Peace, peace, peace. So we begin today with verse 23. Vishayebhyah paravartya sthapanam swasvagolake ubhayesham indriyanam sadamah parikirtitah bahya analambanam vrittehe Esha uparatiruttama. Restraining the senses, dhamma, means withdrawing both the types of senses from their objects and returning them back to their respective abodes. The best state of withdrawal, uparati, occurs when a thought wave of the mind is without any external support. So we are presently studying the six treasures, which is the third among the four primary disciplines. The last time we met, we saw the first among these called shama, restraining of the mind. Now the first part of this verse discusses restraining of the senses. So when it says both the type of senses, means generally the senses that we have are divided into two categories in Vedantic framework. So there are 5 senses of knowledge and 5 senses of action. So the word for sense in Sanskrit is indriya. So the senses of knowledge are called jnanendriya because jnana is knowledge. And the senses of action or activities like hands and feet and so on, they are called karmendriyas because we do karma with the help of those senses. Now, the word karma is used. In a way, we could say that all the senses do karma. Because normally, when we speak about activity, we usually just think about physical activity. But the way the word karma gets used in these books, it involves mental activity as well. So seeing is an action, hearing is an action, or he is karma. Thinking is a mental activity. So everything, all the senses are really doing karma. But here when they say senses of action, it specifically refers to physical activity. The reason the senses need to be withdrawn is that unlike the mind, the senses don't have the ability to discern. The mind at least seems to have that choice of choosing this or that. The senses don't have that choice. If my eyes are closed, I don't see. But when my eyes are open, whether I like it or not, everything before my eyes, the eyes have got to see. The eyes cannot selectively say, I'm going to see only this and not that. The eyes can't do it. The mind can. And therefore, restraining the senses means withdrawing these things. Now, how do you withdraw the senses? One way to do it is essentially just close it. If I don't want to see something, I just need to close my eyes. So either I withdraw or I close the doorways. Now, the word senses, one other important point to remember is this. This is not the sense of sight. The eyes are only a doorway to the sense of sight. Because the eyes are a part of the physical body. The senses are not a part of the physical body. The senses are a part of the subtle body. But the subtle body and the tangible body, they work together. Because sometimes we see that it's possible for a person to lose the sense of sight and yet have these eyes. Sometimes the eyes may be open, but if let's say the optic nerve is damaged, then that person won't be able to see even if the eyes are open. And of course, in about hearing, we know when people become hard of hearing, the ears don't disappear. The ears are there. So this is not the real sense. This is only the door through which sensations go to the real sense. So what does restraining the senses mean? One way of understanding that is that it is just closing the door to the senses. You cannot close the door to all the senses. Well, we can close the eyes, can probably put noise cancellation headphones. You can't really close your tongue. You shut your mouth, that's all. Because if you put something on your tongue, the tongue is going to taste it. The tongue is not going to say, I refuse to taste it. It just doesn't do that. So if I want to restrain my sense of taste, I just have to say, I'm not going to eat anything. So either we keep the object away from the senses or we close the door to the senses. Now, one question would be, and that the answer, I imagine all of you know it already, why should I restrain the senses? Why should I restrain the mind? And one common answer to all this would be, if it is something that is going to take me away from myself, away from my true nature, then it's going to bring more pain and suffering in life. And all of us do already have pain and suffering of various kinds. And the reason for that is the mind and the senses are not come under fully control. And that is why these are called the 6 treasures. Control of the mind, control of the senses. And the second part says about the withdrawal, uparati, when a thought wave of the mind is without any external support. Now, what is a thought wave? The word that is used is vritti in Sanskrit. Some of you who may have read Patanjali's Yoga Sutras know that Patanjali defines yoga as chitta vritti nirodha. Chitta is the mind, vritti is this thought wave, nirodha means control or restraining. So yoga, according to Patanjali, is restraining the thought waves of the mind. So what is this thought wave? Think about the mind as a body of water, say a lake, a big lake. every time a thought enters the mind, and that thought can be triggered through the senses oftentimes. So if I open my eyes and see a table in front of me, so my senses, my sense of sight has gone and grasped that object called the table, and this idea of the table arises in the mind. So that thought, that thinking about the table, it's almost like a wave. A wave occurs in that lake of the mind of the shape of a table, if you like. Now don't think about, well, you can think about it any way you want, but that's called a vritti. So when the table vritti arises, the table wave arises in the lake of the mind, and the mind then compares it. It's essentially, all knowledge is a form of categorization. So once I have seen, let's say the first time I see a table, first time ever, and so I said, what is it? And then maybe and usually, when you're grown up, we can identify a table, what it is. So let's say a little baby sees this object, and then the baby's mom or dad says, that's called a table. So then the mind immediately identifies that specific object, that specific form, and says, okay, this is the table. And so there is some category in the mind which is filed under that cabinet, table. So next time the mind sees a similar object, and it's faster than Google. It immediately scans through all the available categories and says, oh, this is the table. So essentially, all knowledge is like that. That's why when we encounter an object or whatever which doesn't have already in your database, it's not there, then you say, I have no idea what it is. But if you know it, then immediately you are able to identify it. So that's how knowledge occurs. So that's the meaning of thought wave. So every time a thought wave occurs in the mind, knowledge of that object comes. So this verse says, the best state of withdrawal occurs when a thought wave of the mind is without any external support. So if my eyes open and it sees an object, that perception of the object is going to create a thought wave inside my mind. And then, of course, whether I like it or not, my mind is going to go there and start thinking, oh, it's a table. And it just doesn't stop there with identifying. Then we say, oh, it's a big table, it's a small one, it's red in color. It's similar to one I had seen last year. I wonder how much it costs. Just seeing one object, a lot of related ideas and questions come with it. And what does it do? If I'm thinking about tables and chairs, I'm not thinking about the true self. And if I spend my time, spend my life thinking about perishable entities, all of these things are perishable. None of these things live eternally. Then, whatever joy I might get out of thinking about these things will also be perishable. So it's not just happiness that we are looking for. All of us do feel happy now and then in life. It's not that we are not happy. The problem is, our happiness is short-lived. It doesn't continue. We are happy and then it all cools down. And then, of course, there is pain and suffering. Fortunately, the pain and suffering also is not eternal. There is pain, there is suffering, and then it goes down again. Then there is joy and goes down. Entire life is just filled with moments of joy and moments of pain. And throughout all this process, we are getting older. None of us is getting younger. And the only certain destination this body is going toward is eventual death. And that is the question that this book asks. Is life anything more than just continuously experiencing these perishable forms of sukha and dukkha, joy and sorrow, and one day getting old and dying? That's it? Isn't there anything more substantial, something more solid? And what the Vivekachudamani says is, there is. If my mind and my senses, instead of dwelling and spending their time and energy on perishable objects, try to dwell on something that is not perishable, something that is eternal, then that happiness that comes through it will not perish, because your mind is dwelling on the non-perishable. The joy and bliss it brings is also non-perishable. And because we are dwelling on the infinite, there is no pain there, there is no suffering there. Therefore, it's very important where my mind and senses are. And that is why when people spend time in a sacred place, go to places of worship, or go on a pilgrimage, or spend time reading uplifting books, we find the mind calms down. There is a lot of contentment within. So we know from our own experience, when the mind dwells on the supreme, mind dwells on the transcendent, there is absence of suffering as long as the mind is there. And that is why this importance of restraining the mind and restraining the senses, and therefore the importance of withdrawing. So not allowing the thought wave an external support. An external table is what helps give rise to that thought wave of the table in my mind. If I can shut that, then my mind will be free from that wave. Which is why it is easier to meditate with eyes closed. Because technically, if you're thinking of God, why should I keep my eyes closed? And that's a good question. The only answer to that is, if my eyes are open, then there are all these different objects and colors which will give rise to so many thoughts and questions in the mind. Then that mind cannot be then put to the object of my meditation. So if I close my eyes to however little an extent, I'm shutting down at least a part of the world, the sights. If I try to meditate in a quiet spot, and if I'm lucky to find such a spot, then at least I'm shutting down the sounds. If I can restrain myself from eating during meditation, then I'm restraining the sense of taste, and so on. And that's why it's also helpful when you're meditating to find a posture that in which you can sit comfortably, not wear clothes that are very tight, so that the sense of touch will not create these thought forms in the mind. So that's the one way of keeping the senses calm. And that is the importance of withdrawal here. Let's look at the next verse, 24. This describes the next important quality necessary in spiritual life. Sahanam sarvadukhanam apratikara purvakam chinta vilaparahitam satitiksha nigadyate. Bearing all suffering without resistance, anxiety and grumbling is called forbearance. This is a very excellent definition of forbearance or titiksha. all suffering, that's the important key word here. Sarva dukkhanam. How many kinds of suffering there are? One way to categorize the sufferings is into three buckets. In Sanskrit, they are called Adhyatmika, Adhibhautika, and Adhidaivika. Adhyatmika means all pain and suffering that comes to us from our own body and mind. And we know, yes, the body has its aches and pains, the mind has its aches and pains also. So, all the pain and suffering that comes to us through things not going well with our own body and mind, that is one bucket. That's called the Adhyatmika Dukkha. The second kind of pain and suffering can come from other people. We know all of us have had such people around us in our lives who bring a lot of pain and suffering to us. Maybe they are a part of our family or among our friends or our neighbors or at your workplace. Then there are, fortunately, we are not presently living in a time where there are dinosaurs moving around. But if you suddenly find yourself in a wild forest surrounded by animals, then that could be another suffering or pain or anxiety. Anytime a lion or a tiger might pounce on you. Most of us are not in that situation, at least those of us who are here. We might go and spend some time in the wild, but it's a very protected environment nevertheless. So the pain and suffering that can come to us from others, other living beings, is called Adhibhautika. A third kind of pain and suffering is called Adhidaivika. Adhidaivika means through some natural causes, not caused by other people or other animals, but natural causes in the sense of climate change, for instance. Well, it's not really a natural cause. We are definitely contributing to it. But think about an earthquake. Think about a tsunami. When these things happen, or all these different natural disasters that occur, we cannot really pin that down to some specific person. And therefore, all these kind of sometimes people call it supernatural, but there is nothing very supernatural. These are pretty natural. I mean, in the sense you can explain why there is an earthquake, why there is a hurricane. But nevertheless, even if you can explain it, we can't hold any person responsible for them. So they are called a third kind of pain and suffering called Adhidaivika. So this is obviously not the only way to categorize pain and suffering, but that's how it is done in Vedanta books. So all suffering, bearing it without resistance. Now, one good thing to remember is, no matter the source from which pain and suffering may come to us, the suffering that occurs in us is either in the body or mind. There is nothing else really, other than the Atman. And the Atman, the self, the real self, there is no suffering there. So all of the pain and suffering we experience is only affects the body and mind. Which is why in the state of deep sleep, when we are not aware of our body and mind at all, there is no pain and suffering. Our waking experience can be sometimes joyful, sometimes terrible. Dreams can be sometimes very pleasant, sometimes could be nightmares. But deep sleep is always wonderful. Deep sleep, there is no pain and suffering. And that is because the body and mind are not there in our consciousness. and so we have no pain and suffering. So an easy way to become enlightened, if you like, or an easy way to not experience pain and suffering at all in life is to remain perpetually in deep sleep. I'm not sure even if it were possible whether anyone would want that, because a deep sleep is a state of, we are unconscious, we are not awake. So, and then even if we wanted it, we can't. Sometimes you may have noticed that even if you have said the next day off and you say, I'm just going to sleep and I'm not in no hurry to wake up next morning. So you don't set an alarm, you just make sure that nobody disturbs you and say, I'm just going to sleep and sleep and sleep. Even then, sometime or other you're going to wake up. Even though there is no hurry, you don't have to do anything, but you will wake up. And so then the question is, what makes me up? I don't want to wake up. I want to sleep as long as I want. And sometimes Vedanta teachers say, your karma wakes you up. Your karma, as if to say, karma comes and says, you have been enjoying this peace for quite a long time, but I have a lot of pain to give you, and I cannot give it to you as long as you're asleep. And so even if you're not set an alarm, you will wake up and then suddenly remember, oh my God, I forgot to do this. And then the pain starts. So bearing all suffering without resistance. The resistance comes because of identification. When suffering comes, it's not even necessary to say it's not a happy experience. None of us enjoys suffering. And so if there is suffering to the body and mind, and if I resist it because I feel I am suffering, and I feel I am suffering because, although the suffering is to the body and mind, I feel this is me. So it's this identification with the body and mind that makes me resist it. You now go to the wall and take a hammer and give a good thrashing and beating to the wall is not going to resist. The wall doesn't feel anything. Well, we don't know what the wall is thinking, but the wall is not identified with its wall identity. We don't, at least from our perspective, we don't see any consciousness there. But we resist because of this identification. So without resistance means I'm refusing to say that this body is me, the mind is me. It's not easy. We have to make an effort. We might fail 99% of the time. The failure is not so much an issue. What is important is that effort. Am I at least willing to make that effort? Because if I keep making that effort, reminding myself, this is just the body and mind, maybe with time, with practice, I may be able to forbear a little bit more than I used to 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Because without forbearance, spiritual life is difficult, or just life itself is difficult. It's not just that forbearance is important to practice Vedanta. Forbearance is necessary even if someone is not interested in religion and spirituality. Parents know this very well. You have a child growing up at home, and especially when they are teenagers, what can you do? How much can you shout at them? Everyone is like, well, finally you just have to forbear. Do the best you can and forbear. At different stages in life, sooner or later, we learn the importance of forbearance. Next, without anxiety. Sometimes we may not we may not resist, but inside the mind will be anxious. So a true forbearance means there should be no anxiety as well. Chinta rahitam. Chinta means anxiety. In fact, in another book called the Panchadashi, anxiety is considered a poison. Chinta visha, that's the word used there. Visha means poison. Just as if you ingest poison, and if you take a strong poison and a big dose, probably will just die instantly. But if you take a little bit of poison, it will go inside and act and slowly sap your energy and eventually will die. Anxiety is like that. If we are perpetually living in anxiety, then even modern medical science says how it affects all the different systems within the body. How a lot of trouble with the heart, with blood pressure and so on, a lot of that is also connected with anxiety. So it is truly a poison which can destroy us physically and it can destroy us spiritually as well. So we need to find ways to go beyond anxiety. So this is therefore an important practice, to forbear everything without resistance, without anxiety, and without grumbling. Sometimes we feel that if I keep on grumbling, telling everyone around me, oh, you do not know my problem, blah, 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 we think that this will somehow reduce the burden in my heart. Maybe it might for a short time, but it's no solution at all. That's why sometimes when you ask some people, hey, how are you? And they start telling you all their problems for next half an hour, you might say, oh, I shouldn't even have asked that question. Because a lot of times people forget that how are you is a greeting. It's not a question. And so everyone has their own burdens to carry. So going on grumbling about one's burdens to others is not particularly helpful. So therefore the practice of forbearance, titiksha, means bearing everything, bearing all suffering without resistance, without anxiety, without grumbling. Now that doesn't mean to allow yourself or to put yourself in a situation that, oh, I need to bear, I need to practice forbearance, so first I need to suffer. We don't have to go looking for suffering. There is suffering enough without going and searching for it. Whenever it comes, we have to bear it patiently. That's the next practice called titiksha. Holy Mother Sharda Devi used to say that forbearance is the greatest virtue. She said, one who forbears survives. One who does not forbear perishes. And so that's a very practical and also very useful teaching to remember. Verse 25. Shastrasya guruvakyasya satya buddhyavadharanam sa shraddha kathita sadbhihi yaya vastupalabhyate. The wise say that faith or shraddha, by means of which the real is attained, means accepting as authentic the words of the scripture and of one's teacher. Now, shraddha, although it's often translated in English as faith, the word faith has become somewhat diluted because we just use it too often. Oh, I have faith in this, I have faith in that. But shraddha has a much greater depth, a much greater power than the word faith, as it is sometimes casually used by many people. So when someone says, I have faith that God exists, or I believe in God, or I have faith that there is something imperishable within me, or my true nature is imperishable, what does that faith mean? What does that word Shraddha mean? It means simply this, that deep down, you could probably, a better translation into English might be gut feeling. It's like, I know this is true. I have no proof for it. If you ask me for an evidence, I have no evidence. I have not experienced it, but I know it's true. And there are things in life like that. You cannot prove it to anyone. You cannot show any evidence for it, but deep down you know that's true. Now that is Shraddha. Now that kind of Shraddha is very important. So he says, accepting as authentic the words of the scripture and of one's teacher. Now, first of all, the word acceptance should be understood in the correct way. That no blind acceptance is intended, because in Vedanta study and practice, questions are always entertained. No question is out of bounds, so to speak. Sometimes I have some school students and college classes visiting the Vedanta Center, or I sometimes am invited to speak to these students, and I tell them straight away, I said, feel free to ask anything that you want, because sometimes people do feel hesitations, especially in an interfaith setting, and so people even if they have some question, they are so worried that, I hope this is not offending, is not offensive. And so they will often say, I don't mean to offend, but can I ask about this? And I often say, it's very difficult to offend me. So I said, just ask whatever you want, because I know that if I hold on to truth, if I am honest, I have nothing to be offended about. And so long as the question is sincere, not just asking for the sake of asking, which becomes pretty clear in the way the question is asked. Questions are always entertained in Vedantic tradition. So acceptance is not something that should raise a red flag in our mind, that it's not a blind acceptance. The reason is, at the very least, we must have acceptance in the teaching, at least as a working hypothesis, with at least enough faith that what I am studying may have some truth, may have something that is beneficial for me, while always retaining the freedom for oneself to walk away. No one is forcing anything on anyone. So if I choose to study something, it's because I believe that this is something that will help me. Or when you go and, let's say you start reading a novel, or reading any book for that matter. Now you continue reading the book because you feel in some form, in some way, this book is worth investing my time and energy into. Maybe you read some 10, 15 or 20 pages of book and say, I'm just getting bored, doesn't help me. You can just keep it down. The book is not saying you can't put it down. Sometimes people say that the book is so interesting that you can't put it down. One book was published and one reviewer wrote about a book. This book is such that once you put it down, you will never feel like picking it up again. So we always have a freedom But the role of faith is that we will not undertake any activity unless there is this minimal faith that I'm investing some time into this, I'm investing some energy into it, that this is somehow going to help me in some way. If I don't even have even that, then you say, well, why am I wasting my time doing all this, right? And so that is the meaning of Shraddha, to start with this faith that this is something good, that this is something authentic, while reserving the right to question at every step. Vivekananda, as a young man, when he went to Ramakrishna, and you know, those of you who have read his life know, he was by no means a very docile student. Later on, Vivekananda used to say that I questioned my master at every step of the way. And now, therefore, I know every inch of the path. And so, even when we have questions here, feel free to ask whatever questions come to your mind. But it's important also to give some thought before asking a question. Because sometimes, if you just ask, something pops in mind and you ask, it's possible that if that question has not come from deep within somewhere, that answer won't stick. Maybe the same answer would come then maybe 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later. So you allow the question to mature a little bit. Give some thought of your own to the question that comes. You see, if you ask a question and find an answer in a book, or find an answer, let's say you ask some question to me and I give you an answer, and perhaps you are happy with that answer, that's great. But you will be 10 times happier. Your happiness will be a lot more if a question pops in your heart and then you kind of dwell with that question. And then you are able to discover an answer yourself. So finding an answer yourself is so much more wonderful an experience. One other thing I want to mention before stopping, an important ability in spiritual life is to be able to live with a few unanswered questions and doubts in some corner of our heart. We live in a time where we want everything instantly. And Google has, remember there was some article maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the title, "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" Read that, I think it's very interesting. I think it came in the Atlantic. So one of the things that have happened today, and I mean, there is the blessing, of course. I'm not by any means against Google. I use Google search myself quite a lot. The advantage, sure, is that you want to find something and you get instant answer, which is great. The problem is that we have become so used to getting instant, immediate answers that we may be losing the ability to kind of just hold that question in the heart, hold that doubt in the heart, as people in an earlier generation used to do. Earlier, before there was internet, before there were computers, before there was this easy online search, if you had some doubt, if you had some question, and if there was nobody nearby to answer that, you have to go to a library, and there'll be like this, volumes and volumes. So you have to kind of pick up a book, try to turn the pages. It took time. So we had to live with a few unanswered questions in the heart. And I think that's important, because most discoveries in spiritual life, which truly stick with us, stay with us, strengthen us, are the discoveries we make on our own. Yes, there will be support from outside. There are books, there are teachers, there is a good support system, yes. But try as much as you can to discover that answer, because that's really very empowering. I say that because there will always be some questions, some doubts without an immediate answer. And oftentimes we will discover that the best teacher is life itself. What life will teach us through our own struggles, through our own effort, no book can give it to us. No person can give it to us. So we have books, we have people, we have teachers, but we also have this inner struggle. So that's the important thing to keep in mind about questions. I think we will stop here now, and then next time we will begin with verse 26. If you have any ideas, thoughts, questions.
Swamiji, sometimes I wonder that my mind is controlling my vision, like what I want to see. My vision is saying, but my mind is kind of controlling to see that. So how do I know that what I'm seeing is right? Because I'm not saying that I'm looking at the color and the color is yellow, but sometimes I have noticed that it's time also a factor, that when I'm seeing the things, it's not the things I'm supposed to see, but my mind is controlling. Mm-hmm. So how do I, and my mind will going to discriminate, that is, I should not see this or I should. So how do I, it's like kind of, I juggle with that.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's a very good question, because our minds are already colored. They are colored by our past experiences. They are colored by the samskaras, the mental impressions that we have accumulated through our past actions. And so there is a lot of talk in academia about objectivity, being neutral, observing everything, which is how journalists and reporters and scholars say that is what they try to do, and many of them believe they are completely objective. But the reality is that that's a myth. Everyone's mind is colored. We do see everything with a specific lens that is already there in our mind. What we can do is, if we remain conscious of the fact that all of us have our own biases, our own prejudices, and if I see something, if I try to understand something, with the awareness that I have these pre-existing condition, if you like, of my mind, then I will make a little extra effort to look at everything even from other perspectives, and not be so dogmatic as to think that the way I see something or the way I judge something, that's exactly how it is. At least we will have that much humility to be tentative. Yes, we all should have. We all already have our own opinions about everything. But then to think that my opinion is the truth, and anyone having a different opinion is just wrong, that doesn't help. But we know that there are people who do believe that way. Yes. Yep.
Hariom Swamiji. Swamiji, it's clear from today's lecture how forbearance is important, but what can we do in our daily lives to increase our own ability or our own depth of forbearance, to become more forbearing?
Well, this is what we need to do. If I can cut down on grumbling, if I can cut down on complaining, if I can just bear, I think we will be able to increase our ability to forbear things. Now, forbearance doesn't necessarily mean that I should just kind of allow myself to be put in a situation where pain and suffering will come. That's not the idea. But when it comes, rather than getting so agitated by it, to a point that I forget what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done, then that doesn't help. So a person who forbears remains calm enough then to know what should be done to get out of that influence of that pain and suffering. That's the idea.
Swamiji. So you talk about doubts that remain in the heart for a long time. This is a question that I've had my entire life, and I've had many answers to it come my way, but I'm interested in hearing
Your entire life so far.
So far,
Yeah.
yes. Talk about resistance of suffering being due to identifying with the body and the mind. And you gave the example of hitting the wall with a hammer. It doesn't resist in the same way. I understand that if I am the Atman, then I am that to which the body and mind is appearing in maybe simple terms. But why is it only this body and mind that I sense? If someone else is being hurt, I don't feel it. So why shouldn't I identify with this body and mind if it's the only thing that gives me any sensations? It seems as though it's natural and logical to conclude that this is me. If I can't feel the wall, I can't feel you, I can only feel my own senses. So that seems, do you understand the question? It's something I've struggled with.
Yeah, thank you. Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda have answered this question as well, and that is, we are not identified only with our body and mind. We are identified with our family, our friend. There are people who are close to us, and they have a body and mind as well. So, how much affected I am by pain and suffering will depend on the extent of my identification. Because people are suffering every moment on this small little planet. Forget about the larger universe. There are people dying every second. But we are not grieving and mourning all the time, although people are dying. Because a lot of the time we don't even know them. We are not even aware of the fact, although we read these statistics in daily papers about how many daily deaths are occurring in the country. But among those deaths, if there is some childhood friend of mine, I get the news has died. Maybe I have not met that friend of mine for the last 20 years. I just feel something because I knew that person. And if the person among these people who are hospitalized or are suffering is say someone who is closer to me, who is living nearby, then I feel I'm hurt even more. If it's someone from within my closer family, I'm hurt even more. And if it is, of course, my own body, that's even more. So how much I'm affected is directly related to how much I'm identified with. And so if one is happy with this identification and said, well, suffering is a part of life, and so be it, then they don't have to make any effort to disidentify from themselves. But if some people say, no, I don't want to suffer, I don't want pain, if that is what I don't want, then I have to find ways of disidentifying with it. Because one other thing is important as it is Disidentifying with it is not the same as discarding it. So when I don't identify with the body and mind, should not be understood to mean I shouldn't take care of my body and mind. It should not mean that if the body is suffering, let it suffer. That's not the idea. I know I'm not my car, but I do take care of my car, right? So similarly, we can take care of our body and mind. We can try to keep our body and mind out of harm's way, out of somehow get it not have to suffer more than it does. But all of this can be done without being identified with it. So that's the general observation. The more I'm identified with perishable things, the more the pain. Yeah, and as I said, in deep sleep, when we are not identified with it, no pain. So it's kind of pretty logical in that sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Namaskar, Swamiji. We spoke about the chitta and vrittis and how our samskaras, let's say our current experiences, we could be aware about what thoughts and waves are rising in our mind. But, throughout our growing our life, we could have instilled some samskaras that's sitting out there that could be arising or some senses or something. The question is how do we identify some of the past samskaras, and is there a way we could either dissolve them or burn them out? And then one of the things that I remember is in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, they mention something about the 5 ties of bondages, like causality and effects. Working on the cause could be, that's our ignorance, tied to the effects of egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to the body. So if we try to reflect on that, if any thoughts are arising, and let's say if we could try to correlate, would that be sufficient, or are there other practices that could help us to dissolve?
Thank you. It's a big task. In fact, if we can find a way to eliminate all samskaras, we are already enlightened. One of the sayings I am fond of and I often quote is this, that if I find myself in a hole, the first thing to do is to stop digging. So samskaras are so subtle that eventually we have to take care of them, yes. But before I take care of the samskaras, I have to take care of my actions, both physical actions and mental actions, which is thinking. Because every activity, physical and mental, is producing more samskaras. So if samskaras are a problem, first thing for me to do is be aware of what new samskaras are being created. When I get that under some control, then I can turn my attention to the samskaras themselves. Now, because the mental impressions are subtle, the mind needs to become strong and subtle itself. Mind needs to acquire that ability to deal with samskaras. And that is what in the Katha Upanishad, there is a phrase which is used called Sukshma Darshitva, the ability to see subtle things. Sukshma is subtle. That calls for purification of the mind. So that is the primary effect of practicing any of these yogas, whether it's Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga. First thing is it purifies the mind. And when it purifies the mind acquires a clarity. And with that clear vision, the mind then acquires both the clarity and the power to deal with these samskaras. In Bhakti Yoga, in the yoga of devotion, ultimately it is believed that it's God's grace that destroys all these samskaras. which is really the cause of future births. In the path of knowledge, they believe that it's just as light eliminates darkness, the knowledge of the Atman eliminates all these samskaras, because they are all products of ignorance. Now, this is just a theological way of explaining. So eventually, samskaras will go. They have to go. How you explain how that samskara goes, what kind of analogies you give, what kind of descriptions you give, that might vary from one tradition to another tradition. But ultimately, these subtle chains which are tying us down to this perishable world, they have to go. Yeah. Srika.
Swamiji, in verse 23, you mentioned that we withdraw these senses and return them to abode. Abode is towards, think about God. Where are these senses?
Now, the abode of senses, you don't have to kind of take it too literally. Just like if my sense is going out, if my sense of perception is going out through the eyes and covering the object in front, returning to the abode means just kind of close it and not allow it to go there. Just it can remain here. That's all it means. Yeah, nothing very esoteric about it. No.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk some more about forbearance and that line between accepting suffering and pain and responding to it, or complaining and talking about it with loved ones or seeking support?
Yeah. I don't think there's much to say more than what I have already said. There is this book called I think it was a great bestseller at one time. It's called The Road Less Traveled. Pretty old book, really. I think author is Scott Peck. So if you have chance, take a look at that book, The Road Less Traveled. And if I remember right, I read it years ago, it begins with something like this, that life is tough. What makes life even tougher is our resistance to the idea that life is tough. Once we accept life is tough, we will discover that it's not so tough after all. So sometimes pain and suffering is like that. The more you resist it, the more you feel it. But I'm not saying you kind of allow yourself to be subject to suffering. All that I'm saying is, if you accept this is the nature of life. That is why the Buddha said life is suffering. There's no ambiguity there. It's just like clear, life is suffering. Krishna referred to our human experience as joyless in the Gita. So we need to kind of ponder over that and say, if I'm experiencing pain and suffering in life, that's not unusual. Everyone in the world is suffering. Some people are good at hiding it, some people are not so good at hiding it. Some people want to claim that, oh, I'm so happy. Through God's grace, I'm so happy. Kind of spend a little time with them and then just say, are you really so? I have no problem at all of any kind. And if you are kind of close to them, they'll say, oh yeah, this is this problem and that problem. And then that's the story of everyone, not just human beings. If we could understand the language of dogs and cats, they are probably saying the same thing as well. So every living creature, pain and suffering is the cause. And every living creature is trying to find in their own way how to go beyond it. What these books are trying to do is going to the root of the problem. Clearly, if I have a headache, I need to take Tylenol or something and the headache goes. So there is a solution to that pain. Is that a permanent solution? Or no, I can get headache again after 2 days. So yes, there are ways to overcome suffering, but what the Vivekachudamani is trying to do is not just find quick fixes, not just find, okay, kind of solve the problem for the time being. What it is doing is it going to the root of the problem. Why is there pain and suffering at all? And if I can solve it at that root level, then I'm free from it forever. So that's the idea. So we will stop here now. But if you have any questions, hold them in your heart for a week at least. Maybe before we meet next Wednesday, you might have already found answers to those questions. If not, of course, there'll always be a place here you can come and share your thoughts and comments. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhum. We'll continue with this study next Wednesday. On Sunday, we'll have the satsang as usual, continue with the reflection on the Gita. And on Saturday, we will have the meditation at 6 o'clock. So you're welcome for all of these programs. We'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.